Tomb Raider 2, the strain of making 2 games 2 years in a row was taking its toll. The developers at Core Design went to their boss and said, "If you want the next game to be any good, we need 2 years to make it." "Okay," said their boss, and they went to work making what would become Tomb Raider: The Last Revelation. Meanwhile, another team was put together to make Tomb Raider 3, because God forbid we go a year without them. Actually, from a business point of view, it does make sense. The series was becoming hugely popular, and you don't pass up an opportunity to make more money, do you? But because it was made by another team, we ended up with a game that feels different. I'm on record as saying I'm not particularly fond of Tomb Raider 3. My memories of this are dominated with being a teenager and feeling totally frustrated with it in a way I hadn't with the first two. And yet I have to confess, I didn't hate my recent Let's Play of the game as much as I thought I would. Maybe it's the passage of time and a game that was once complicated now feels simple by modern standards. Or maybe it's not as bad a game as I thought it was. It does have 2 good things going in its favour: its graphics and its soundtrack. Tomb Raider 3 is gorgeous, and a lot of that is to do with the lighting. The previous game introduced dynamic lighting, but it was still a bit clunky in its execution. A room was dark and then a flare would cause solid bright light. Tomb Raider 3 introduced more subtlety to the lighting. Flares, or let's face it, glow sticks, lit up the area around Lara but still left plenty of shadows. Those shadows impacted how I felt about those rooms, because I always had this sense that there was something lurking in the darkness. Remember that room with all the snakes in them? That terrified me back in the day. Sunsets actually change the colour of the landscape. The outdoor areas of the high security compound are awash with red, and so too is Lara, which is not something I remember seeing much of in games of this era. There's also a level of polish that helps to sell the visuals. The fire, the ripples of water, the blood flowing through the river, it all looks like what it's actually meant to look like, instead of just 12 pixels rammed together. What Tomb Raider 3 does well is really make you feel like you're in those environments. India feels muddy, Nevada feels hot, Antarctica feels cold, and London feels industrial. A big part of what brings the graphics to life is the audio, both in terms of sound effects and the music. The original Tomb Raider was, for the most part, silent. Tomb Raider 2 introduced background sounds, but I often compare the bird noises in Venice with a golf sim from the Sega Mega Drive because it was so basic, though I do concede that the offshore rig soundscape was pretty damn good. From the opening seconds of Tomb Raider 3, it becomes clear what a massive step up the sound is. Tomb Raider 3 is where the soundscape becomes a lot more nuanced. It wasn't possible to literally show us flies and crickets, but you absolutely believe that they're there. There's also rain, wind and water sounds that bring the environments to life in a way that the graphics couldn't quite manage at that time. Tomb Raiders 1 and 2 so often said, "Boom, the music is now playing," whereas Tomb Raider 3 is much more softer in its execution of the music. A standout piece of music in this game has bird sounds at the beginning and end to create the illusion that we're still listening to sound effects before the music gently fades in, plays, and then fades back out. Hearing a piece of music fade in rather than simply begin was something completely new for its time. One of the things it did really well was to create a creepy atmosphere. The game remixes a previous piece of music into something that made sections of this game genuinely scary, most notably in the Temple of Puna. Now I keep saying things like softer, gentler, nuanced, but that's how the presentation of Tomb Raider 3 feels. But that's not to say that the dramatic pieces aren't dramatic, because they are. But the sound and visuals work together instead of being separate entities that are smashed together. It also helps that there's a lot more music, so while you do hear some pieces several times over the course of the game, you don't get the kind of repetition that you did in the past. There are other things about this game that are enjoyable. I love that some parts of it are reminiscent of the original game, which is always a good thing. I'm particularly thinking of the lost city of Tinnus, which has a colour scheme similar to Greece, and has a classic design of central room with doors that lead to separate puzzles to gather keys. There are some sneaky and clever moments in this game. I love the part where the reassuring Tomb Raider 2 music begins playing in the Temple of Puna. It's music that we've come to associate with good things happening, a sense of making progress or achieving something. Naturally, you're thinking all your hard work is paid off and now you can claim your prize. But as you enter the room, Puna reveals himself and now you have a boss fight on your hands. And it is a boss fight I enjoy. I'm also quite fond of the Sophia one because you don't engage her directly, but rather have to avoid her blasts and electrocute her. It's something different to just shooting at people all the time. There's also a lot of variety of location: India, the Pacific, London, Nevada and Antarctica. I'd argue that London goes on a bit too long and India and the Pacific Islands are a bit similar, but still, overall the game gives us variety. But there really isn't much to link the levels together beyond trying to find various meteorite artifacts. I've been replaying Tomb Raider 2 recently, and one thing that really stood out at me this time is that there is a flow of narrative from location to location. I might not like the modern levels as much as the ancient ones, but there's a reason why Lara goes to Venice. The information on the bad guy's laptop leads her there. There's a reason why she ends up on that offshore rig. She boards a plane, then gets knocked unconscious and imprisoned, which in turn leads her to the wreck of the Maria Doria. Even Chronicles managed to tie its various isolated stories together by having FMVs begin in the past, come into the present, and then move into the past again.
Indeed, Winston, and for this you should be grateful. Deep in the bowels of their vessels lay one of the most powerful artifacts in all Christendom. An artifact which, when wielded at the vanguard of an army, would make that army invincible.
The Spear of Destiny.
But the boat never reached the fatherland with its precious cargo. It disappeared from radar 3 weeks into the journey.
Yes, it always begins with developers brainstorming ideas, but both 2 and Chronicles created a flow of narrative that shows a logical progression from location to location. Tomb Raider 3 simply has the players pick a location on a map and suddenly there you are. Yes, there's a similar goal in all of them, but it's an incredibly thin plot device. The developers came up with a bunch of location ideas and then put minimal effort into trying to tie them together. There are a lot of levels that just kind of meander on. Core design throughout all of the Tomb Raider games could occasionally create a level that just felt like a bunch of ideas shoved together without a lot of refinement. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm just picking on core design. The way games are put together in terms of level design, controls, execution of a particular genre is an ever-evolving process, and Tomb Raider was by no means the only 90s game to ever have some clunky level design. But that doesn't change the fact that some of the levels in Tomb Raider 3 go on and on and on as if they're never going to end. Aldwych is an example of a level that feels like it's unending because there's so much running back and forth in a level that looks the same no matter where you go. The Lost City of Tinnis is similar to St. Francis Folly from the first game. Both have a central room with 4 doors that lead you to mini challenges of some description in order to find a key of some description to unlock a door. Both have an initial section that you have to traverse in order to get to the main room. But while St. Francis Folly's initial section takes about 10 minutes, the Lost City of Tinnis takes a long time to get through. The first section has a collection of small corridors that are so visually similar it's difficult to tell them apart. Then you need to find a key that's pretty much the same colour as the background it's on, so it's difficult to spot. Then you go over a bridge and on a journey that turns out to be nothing more than a half-hour detour to get another key. You'd be forgiven for thinking that at this point the level is beginning to wind down, but oh no, you're only now getting to the big room with the 4 doors. Now I ask you, could we not have just gone over the bridge and then straight into the main room? Why this half-hour detour? If they liked the stuff in the detour so much, why not incorporate it into one of the rooms? If you go into the main room as soon as you access it, the keyhole is on the other side of this gate. That's deliberate design to force you into spending half an hour on a detour, when they could have just put the keyhole in the main room, or better yet, just had you focus on collecting the 4 masks. Now, it's not like the first 2 games never meandered at times. I adore the Greece section from Tomb Raider, but I think it's a fair comment to make that it's a bit too long. But I always knew what the goal was. We were trying to work our way towards the Tomb of Tehoken to find the next piece of the ski on. As I said earlier, the plot to get the meteorite stones is incredibly thin, and is really just an excuse to put Lara in these locations. We aren't given any clues as to why she specifically wants to get into Area 51, or why she ends up on the London rooftops. Now maybe I'm coming off a bit pedantic and maybe you're thinking, oh but Jenny, it was the PlayStation 1 era. But given the storytelling of Tomb Raiders 1 and 4, we know that this is a series that can do better than the paper-thin mini-stories that we get that offer no context to why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, why is Lara on those rooftops? She doesn't even know who Sophia Lee is until Weirdo Guy tells her.
Who employs you? Ah! Miss Sophia Lee! Who's she? What does she do?
It just really annoys me. I mean, say what you want about Chronicles, at least you knew why Lara was doing what she was doing. Well, except for the Russian stuff, that was rubbish. Speaking of rubbish, the underwater propulsion vehicle is the biggest pile of donkey balls in the entire franchise. It's incredibly difficult to manoeuvre, especially in all those tight spaces the game really wants you to go into. Combat is so much fun. You have to line up perfectly with your target, as the UPV will only shoot directly ahead. I mean, I guess that makes sense, but still. Lara is pretty manoeuvrable for a 90s game, even underwater. I know I've bitched about the harpoon gun in the past, but at least you can quickly move into a tactically sound position instead of having to place yourself directly in the enemy's line of fire. None of this is helped by the fact that it still hasn't occurred to the developers to give Lara some kind of underwater breathing apparatus. Or maybe they thought it would be more dramatic to have the player constantly rushing back to the same air pocket over and over again. It means you end up in a bit of a panic state throughout the whole section of the game instead of being able to just enjoy the experience of playing underwater. The kayak is also pretty horrendous, and much like the UPV it is incredibly difficult to manoeuvre, but for different reasons. You spend the whole time fighting against a current, and you can't help but feel that if you just jig your thumbs into the buttons a little bit harder, then the kayak will actually move in the right direction. I swear my thumbs are actually hurting just at the thought of it. It's just not fun to watch Lara being stuck in the same place fighting against a current. And what is with all those traps? How are we meant to dodge swinging blades in something that has the mobility of a truck? And what is with that fall? What is it with Tomb Raider and bullshit drops? The one saving grace is the quad, which is not only easy to drive, but it is a lot of fun, and I'd argue that we don't get enough of it. I'd have loved a level in which the actual area that we have to traverse is huge, bigger than anything we've had up until this point, and so we need to travel back and forth on a quad to save time. But given that this game was being made at the same time as The Last Revelation, and the Cairo section is basically driving about on a bike, maybe they didn't want to duplicate it or do something that would take away from its impact. There are some other little things that irked me. While my Let's Play of this game has been thankfully bug-free, I have in the past encountered some that have caused some issues. The biggest one was a bug that stopped the maintenance door from opening, meaning I couldn't turn on the power and I couldn't get the coin. In other words, it stopped me from progressing in the level. I also don't like that Willard is seriously underdeveloped, though that's an issue throughout all of Core Design's games, with the exception of Natla. As far as I can tell, Bartoli wanted to become a dragon because of his daddy issues, but that's still more than we ever get for Willard. Even if you buy into the idea that he goes crazy with power, I can't believe that anyone would ever be crazy enough to want to turn themselves into a spider. There's also this room that I can't shake the feeling is racist in some way, this guy who really is a racist portrayal, and this, which is an example of what I call the stealth sexualization of Lara. Tomb Raider fans like to pat themselves on the back and say that the developers never sexualized her, it was the publishers that did that. But really, if Lara was a man, would she be straddling this guy? I can't think of an example of a male character straddling another man in a game. But if you can, feel free to tweet me.
Happy retirement.
Even after brainstorming for this review, I'm still conflicted. I still don't know whether I like this game or not, or whereabouts on the list it should be. There are absolutely good things about this game. The way the graphics, the sound effects and the music come together to bring an environment to life was a massive step up from the first two games. But I just can't get over how awful the gameplay is, how dull and meandering the level design can be. And ultimately, it doesn't matter how good your graphics are. If your gameplay is rubbish, it isn't a good game. My old tweet was probably a bit harsh, but if you're battling with Angel of Darkness for bottom place, you've gone wrong somewhere. I understand this game has its fans and that's totally cool. I personally do not enjoy this one. I enjoy individual parts of it, but I can't say I love the whole thing. Is it a worse game than Angel of Darkness? Well, maybe. Or maybe not. It's been so long since I played that game, I really can't remember just how bad it is. Oh god, we're doing Angel of Darkness next, aren't we?
I'm tracking 5 obscura paintings for a client.
Handle it, Rana.
So if you watched my Let's Play of Tomb Raider 3, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it distracted you in some small way from the pointlessness of human existence. If you didn't, there's the playlist for it there. Feel free to give that a click, and we shall return soon for Let's Play Lara Croft Tomb Raider the Angel of Darkness.